they do so. Father, just, ask that you would really speak into this evening exactly what you have for us, and we will give you praise. Thank you again for your goodness to us. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, well, I don't know what each of you had behind coming tonight, what your motivation is, but I know I speak for myself and probably some of us when I say that grief is scary. It can be scary to interface with. I thought I'd tell a little story. When I was in college, Jason and I were mentored by this wonderful couple. Were so dear to us, kind of felt like the first spiritual parents I had, I would say. And soon into our marriage, the husband was diagnosed with cancer, and he later passed away. And up until that point, my MO with grief was like, step back away. I'm afraid. I don't know what to do. And I thought, I can't do that with Jerry. She's so dear to me. I've got to figure this out. So I bumbled through it. I'd call her once a week and just sit on the phone and listen to her cry. That's all I knew to do. So I asked these two ladies who have had some experience with grief, unfortunately, to share with us. This is Judy Moore and Anna Black, and they have both been through and next are going to facilitate our Grief Share group here at 12th Avenue. I'm going to let them share their stories in just a little bit, but wanted to share a couple of verses. We often talk about the church being the body of Christ. 1 Corinthians 12:26 says, if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. So it's not an if we suffer, it's a when, and we need to be equipped to do that. And we know, I think all of us would agree, we know it's important, but we don't always know the how. And we're probably, if you're like me, really afraid of messing something up or being insensitive or saying something that is going to hurt somebody. So I'm going to let these two ladies introduce themselves. And I sat with them about a month and a half ago and just said, as you were going through your grieving process, what was helpful to you, what was not helpful. And so all of the content from our evening, with the exception of a few excerpts I'm going to read from a book that we'll talk about later, is from their wisdom and experience. So with that, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. I forgot the disclaimer. Okay, so there are likely to be tears this evening, and that's okay. And if that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's also okay, because that's why we're here, is to learn how to lean into that and, sit with others in their pain. So, go ahead. I can start.
Okay, yeah, so I think my grief journey kind of started with my mom's diagnosis of cancer in 2019. So I just gotten back from living overseas for 2 years in Uganda, straight into my mom being diagnosed with cancer. And then kind of for like 11 months, she was going through treatments. And I think that was in August. I literally just got back in August. And then in January is kind of when we got the terminal diagnosis. And so from there, it was just kind of a lot of she went through a lot of the trial experiments. So there's still just kind of hope and that waiting mixed with just kind of already that grieving process of just kind of that unknown. And then she passed in July 2020. And then something Judy brought up that I wanted to mention too is that although I think we think of grief as the death of a loved one, I think there's grief in a lot of different other ways, and that can be, something, divorce or the, moving away to a different, location. There's all different types of ways of grief, and I guess I bring that up in my story just because I forgot to mention I was also diagnosed at the same time as my mom with cancer, and so I was walking kind of my own health grief at the same time as figuring out my mom, the grief of my mom, and so those two are very tied together. I was grieving my mom, but I was also grieving my health, and so I think it's also important to think of grief as obviously the death of somebody, but just thinking through ourselves and also those that we love, how they might be grieving in just different scenarios outside of death. So, yeah, it's my story.
And I could add, like an illness or an injury that totally changes your life. You can grieve the fact that you can't be a provider. You can grieve the fact that you can't be the spouse that you used to be. So that's one way people suffer loss also. So anyway, so think about that when you see older people that can't walk, they're in a wheelchair or an amputation. You lose a body part and you grieve because you can't do what you used to do. So, thanks, I'm fine.
Oh, thank you. Just being with you.
Thank you. So, that was a prelude. So a little bit of an intro. I was blessed to have a mom and dad who prayed about everything. They knew Jesus and they prayed about everything. And later I was blessed with 3 sons. I prayed for my children before conception and certainly after conception, and I still pray for them. So, I guess my first big loss was when I got a phone call that my 30-year-old son Logan died from an overdose. And none of us knew he was using drugs. I don't think he'd been using very long. But that was on December 28th, 2019, the day he was supposed to come over and celebrate Christmas with me. So that was very unexpected. And then more recently, my 90-year-old mother passed away in March. And she had been on hospice for like 3.5 months. So it wasn't unexpected. It was anticipated. I got a phone call on a Wednesday night, and I'm glad I took the call because I was at Life Group. She was at Presbyterian Manor, and she was gone before I got there. So even though she was on hospice, I thought I hopefully could be there for her last breath, but I just didn't. I missed it. I was there pretty quick. I helped get her up off the floor, but even though it was anticipated, it maybe was not as hard as my son's death, but it was still hard. But keep in mind that people suffer grief or loss in a variety of ways, and they may feel like they shouldn't feel grief, or they shouldn't be as upset as they are. And if they are, you have to allow them to have that grief and to have somebody with them who's not embarrassed or awkward or uncomfortable. Just be there with them. Because it is inevitable. And we're not guaranteed a long life either, so it will happen.
Thank you, ladies. A couple of things as we're getting started we wanted to add, because I know most of you in the room and know many of your stories pretty intimately. I know that there are some in this room who are very acquainted with grief, and we want to give you a chance to add in throughout the evening if you have something that you want to share from your experience, and then we'll definitely have a time for that at the end too. But if there's something you want to say, or even the ladies are open to questions throughout if you want clarification on something, or even at the end if you want to jot them down. Either way, it's going to be pretty relaxed this evening, but we do want some interaction. All right, so we are going to start out talking about the ministry of presence.
Yes. So I have really come to be just a strong proponent and just a love of the ministry of presence. And I think essentially there's a couple ways I think to kind of engage in the ministry of presence. And one I think is just sitting with the hurting. I think that our natural inclination is to want to solve, to fix, to say something, to have the perfect words, to have the perfect action. you know, whatever it may be, to take the pain away from our loved one, because their pain is our pain. And I think that it goes against our natural inclination to kind of shut that down, and there's of course a place for that, but I think that one of the biggest things that you can do with people is sit with them in silence, and you can listen to them, and you can, you know, if they want to be, you know, rub their shoulder or whatever, or if you're a dude and you just want to sit there and listen, I don't know, but just that being with them, engaging with that uncomfortability of their grief and their sadness, is one of the biggest things that you can do. And I think I really learned that, not necessarily, I mean, yes, when I was going through my own process, but even when I was overseas in Uganda, we didn't speak the language for a long time. Still probably didn't after even leaving, but when we first got there, they had us go out into the village and sit with widows or people who were suffering and just listen to their stories through a translator. And we literally had nothing to offer them but our presence. And that ministered to them more than us doing anything else for them. And that was when I was kind of like, I started to understand the ministry of presence and the impact that just sitting with somebody in silence honestly has more of an impact than anything that you can say, because they're not going to remember what you say to them in that moment, but they will remember that you sat with them, and they will remember that you continue to come and sit with them, and that you continue to be there for them while they cried or were angry or had nothing to say. They will remember that you were there, and they will not remember the things that you say maybe, but they will remember you're there. So that is one way to do it.
Yeah, I remember when my son died, my sister came from Colorado, and you know, you're overwhelmed initially, and it's hard to even think and process. And so she would like, Judy, you need to do this, and she's my sister, so she could say it, but if you're close enough with somebody, you know, do you have an appointment? Oh yes. I mean, I would just totally forget stuff. Or we'd talk about what we need to do to get ready for the service, and then like, we need to do stuff. She would remind me, and she did it in a very gentle, loving way. I was amazed really that I needed her that much. But when you're going through the initial, especially, I mean, you forget a lot of normal stuff. And in the grief share that you had talked about that, going back to work, I noticed it too. So I had a few people at work that would just be present with me and kind of help me refocus. And then my sister too, to help me refocus, just to be present. But another thing, sometimes in that so much going on and forgetting, you'd forget about grass needs to be mowed, or the flowers are dying because they're not watered, things like that. If you're close enough to be in tune to those types of things, you can, you know, volunteer to take care of that, because that's something that is not going to be high priority when you're planning a service, or even the months after that. Who knows when it's going to be a priority again, or how quickly they can get back to their normal routine. So offering to do a load of laundry, offering to make a delivery for them, or to go get something for them, or that's another way of being present and helping. And little things, like little things can mean a lot. And you as one individual maybe can't do it all, probably cannot. It's going to take more than one, but if you can offer and do one thing, in that first week, that first month, I mean, that was really great. And I remember even after my sister left to go back to work and I went back to work, I would get phone calls and text messages from her, just kind of checking in with me, you know, to see if I was still reading my devotion and did I like it, and just kind of hearing my tone of voice. You know, you can tell a lot by a tone of voice, you can tell more by seeing their expression, but you can tell a lot how somebody's doing by their tone of voice. And just checking in, that's another way of presence as well.
Yeah, and I'll add like, yeah, kind of what she's saying, like filling in for some of those roles that person played in a person's life. So like, for instance, you know, when my mom passed, she was the one that did all the finances in the family. And so suddenly my dad's having to figure out all these roles that he had never had to do before, because my mom took care of, you know, this, and this, and he took care of this, and this. And even just in our family dynamic, like I noticed, like my mom was always the one that was like, got us all together. It was like, this is where we're going, you know, we're planning this vacation and we're going to the beach and we're going this day and I've got this booked and I've got that booked. And suddenly it was like, we were like, okay, we should get together, you know, haven't seen each other in a while. And I was like, okay, who's gonna like take the initiative? Like who does that now? And so when somebody dies, it's not just obviously their presence that's missing, but it's all the roles that they filled in everybody's life. And so it's, you know, I think just being, if you're close with that person, you would probably have a little bit more of, you know, insight into what they, you know, what kind of roles they filled, but even just being mindful of, oh, you know, this person always mowed the grass. And so, yeah, offering specific things, not just saying, is there anything that I can do to help, because they have no idea what they need in that moment. And so if you're able to, you know, I don't know, just find what you're good at, even just taking your own skills and saying, you know, I'm really, you know, I've got a lawn mowing business. Is that something I can do for you? And so being specific with your request, you know, what you're at, you know, how you can help. And then also asking permission too. Don't, I would say don't just go mow somebody's lawn or clean this, because you never know if that was, you know, their last, you know, I don't know, you broke the lawnmower and that was their husband's lawnmower. So just always being conscious to ask permission, but be specific with what you're asking, because that really helps when you're just so jumbled and you don't have a clue what's going on and everything's hazy. Just having really specific needs met and asked, that's really just super helpful.
If you say, let me know if you need something, that is so casual that it's too distant. If somebody said that to me, I'm like, okay, I will. And I'm like, no, I won't. Because I'm not really sure if you really want to. That's why being specific helps. Can I make a salad? Can I make a bread or a cake or something specific, and whatever you can definitely deliver on. Because when you're going through grieving, it is wonderful that people are so kind and considerate, and sometimes it's quite amazing. It's truly amazing. But also in the back of your mind, you know how we can be skeptical if you're like, well, I don't know how sincere they are, so, you know. That's why it's good to be specific. Only with a few would I be brave enough to say, can you do such and such for me? Because, you know, we just have those fears of what if, and there's only a few people that you can be brave enough to ask. And the other people that offer, you're not brave enough to ask. So that's another reason why we say be specific with what you offer.
Yeah, and even if they turn you down, even the offer is meaningful, I think. Like there are a lot of times people ask me if they could do something specific for me, and I said, you know, we don't need that right now, but it still stuck out to me. So even if they turn you down, know that what you're offering is still valuable to them. So
And they may reconsider and take you up at a later time.
yeah.
Oh yeah, they offered to do such and such, I really could use that. And they may, you know, really want to take you up on it later on. So the next part is just sit with the hurting. I think we have talked about that.
Yes, okay, I will say that.
Okay.
I think it kind of ties into just sitting with people and feeling like you need to say something, but you don't have the right words, and, you know, kind of ties into that. So I would say that if you're, especially early on, if you're gonna say anything, I think that the most honest thing that you can tell somebody is, I don't know how to help you, but I want to. Like, I remember specific people who said that to me. They didn't assume they knew what to say. They didn't, you know, try and fix it. It was just I want to help, and I want to be there for you, and I'm here for you, and I'm sorry I would take this pain away from you if I could. but for now, I'm just going to sit with you in it. Because the truth is you can't take away the pain. You really do just have to walk through it. And so I think just instead of saying, trying to fix it with your words, saying, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to walk with you through it is more, meaningful than trying to come up with the perfect phrase of how to fix the pain, because you just can't. And so I think just admitting that and admitting how helpless you feel, but how much you love them is, I think, a really good thing to start off with, and to continue with.
Yeah. And because we are all different, we all have different maturity levels, different background experiences. Even if somebody came to me and said, and they had lost a loved one, even if they said, I know what you're going through, just that it would come across rather arrogant and insensitive. Yes, you've lost a loved one, but you don't exactly know how I'm dealing with my loss of loved one. So rather than saying, I know what you're going through, think about how you can reword it, and I'm really sorry that you lost so-and-so. And the word loss, I have often debated in my head whether to say loss, because, if they're going to heaven, it still feels like a loss, even though they're in heaven. They're not in pain anymore, and they're not suffering, but it still feels like a loss for those of us on earth. So don't say, I know what you're going through, but you can say, I'm really sorry you're going through this. I'd like to just, sit with you and be with you. You can pray for them and with them, and that can be awkward. So maybe think about what you're going to say before you go. If that's something you really want to do, you can't pray that God's going to take this event away. It's already happened. You really can't pray that God's going to take the pain away, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's actually a reason to have that pain, as awful as that sounds. There's a reason to have that pain. So it's hard to trust God when you're going through pain. It's hard to recite all those verses that you memorized in Bible school, all the positive ones, and it's hard. And so I know what I needed was to I needed to trust God, and that was a little difficult, especially with my son. Not so much with my mom, but with my son. And so there were people that prayed over me for me to recognize, not just feel, but God's comfort. And that's a dual thing. Like, you're feeling pain and you can feel God's comfort at the same time. But it didn't happen like that. But that's something you can pray for. And then guidance and direction and, strength to carry on, but pain's not going to go away that quick, if ever.
So some of what we're sharing tonight is from this book, and also from a passage in Proverbs 25:20 that says, "Don't sing songs to a heavy heart." And Judy, you touch on that a little bit. What was your experience in that? Like, what would you say?
Well, when you feel so painful, some people would try to be uplifting, and that is nice, and I recognize the desire for them to try to help me uplift. But when I actually found that verse, and I was like, oh yes. So it says, "Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment in the cold." You won't take your coat off in the middle of winter. Or like vinegar on soda. So, and then there's another verse that talks about, "The Lord is near the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." That first one was Proverbs, the second one was Psalms. But I think it acknowledges that we have a right to be mourning. We have a right to be in pain. And, you know, maybe at some point I'll be ready to be lifted up with singing, but right now, don't sing songs to a heavy heart. Don't, you know, it's kind of patronizing in a way. And so you have to allow for the mourning and the pain and acknowledge it. And gradually that individual will be ready for the happy songs again. But it seems like a denial to what's happened. If you sing happy songs and joyful songs and clap your hands and all of that, when you're in so much pain, it's like a denial and not acknowledging the fact that something rough happened. So.
And I would, you know, even add that this is going to sound bad at first, but bear with me. I remember people telling me, like, right after, and I do mean like days, you know, that, you know, she's with Jesus, which was true, 100% she was with Jesus, and I was happy. But at that moment, although it was true, truth spoken at the right time is better than just truth spoken. And so, although I could acknowledge that there was a part of me that was relieved for her because her pain was no more and she was no longer suffering here on earth, it felt like it didn't allow me the space to just be sad for that loss. It didn't give me the permission to just grieve. And so I would just, yeah, I think under, you know, whatever phrase you say, whether it be, you know, she's with Jesus or, you know, insert something truthful, although I think what it is, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that it tries to put a positive spin, I think, on something, when in the moment you're like, I just need you to be sad with me. I think I just need you to recognize that I'm just in deep pain and I just can't hear happy things right now. I am happy that my mom is in heaven, and now more than ever I can absolutely recognize the joy of that truth. But at that moment, that it wasn't a truth that was healing to my soul. It was a truth that made me kind of hold in my grief because I felt like I needed to be happy in that moment with that person instead of, and I'm not thinking of a specific person, but just, yeah, it made me feel like I needed to be happy in that moment and be like, you're right, she's with Jesus, instead of just the tears, you know? And so, yeah, I would just be careful with when you insert truths like that, because there is a time and place for those things, and they are absolutely healing, but healing in the right moment. And I think that some of those more, recognizing some of those positive truths and those, you know, beauty from ashes kinds of things are for a little bit later down the road in a grief journey, not for the beginning, because in the beginning, all you are is just painfully sad.
Pain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew 5:4 says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And I read this verse years ago, but I just recently realized that sequencing. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mourning before comfort. You have to have the mourning to get to the comfort. Isn't that odd? You have to go through a mourning grieving process, and through that, hopefully, you allow God to comfort you. And I did. I mean, I've read that verse. Probably got it in Bible school as a child, but I never noticed the sequencing until recently.
A little excerpt from this book says, the actions Paul proposes, rejoicing or mourning, point to the need for empathy. Empathy means feeling with. Note that Paul doesn't say, rejoice with those who rejoice, and also rejoice with those who mourn, because it will get them to feel better. Instead, his words are powerful, clear-cut, and plain-spoken. When someone is rejoicing, rejoice with the person. When someone is mourning, you mourn as well. Nowhere does it say in this passage, or in any other passage in the Bible, that it would be good to try to stop people from feeling and expressing their pain. Hurting people need caregivers who will match their mood to a certain extent. Laugh with them when they feel like laughing, and cry with them when they feel like crying. Remember how Jesus wept with Mary and Martha at the tomb of Lazarus. Christians who mourn with those who mourn and are following the patterns of Jesus and incarnating his love to the hurting. Correcting.
Okay, yeah. If your friend or loved one shares with you that they are losing their faith, or they're losing their trust in God, or they're angry at God, don't freak out. With my son Logan, I mentioned that I prayed for him before he was conceived, and nearly every day. So there was a point when I was angry. God, why didn't you answer my prayers? There's power in prayer. I did what I was supposed to do. And I'm not the only one that has felt that way. Why didn't God answer my prayer? Well, I don't remember at what time I recognized that emotion and that thought, and my first thought was, well, I'm a Christian. I shouldn't be angry at God. That's wrong. I finally expressed it to God. I really believe that God wants us to tell him what we're thinking and feeling. He truly already knows. He knew what I was thinking and feeling when I was trying to repress it because I thought it was not a Christian thing to do. When I finally said, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? He conveyed to me, Judy, I did. And I'm like, you did? Not the way I asked. So that's when I have to trust him. He didn't do what I asked. He did something different. Or he allowed something different, or whatever. I don't know all the answers. But it was when I decided to trust him with my deceased son that I started feeling more comfort and more peace. You have to get to that point where you trust God with the absolute worst thing that can happen to you, even when it's out of your control. Sorry. Only then, only at that point, where Romans 8:28 can be a comfort. We talked about that. When somebody says, Romans 8:28, all things work for good to those that are called and love God and are called according to his purpose. Well, I wasn't ready to hear that until I shared exactly what I thought and felt to God, and I received his comfort, and then I realized I had to trust him that all things work for good. I don't know how yet, but all things work for good. That's in his word. It's his word, and I have to trust him on that. So, yeah, if you kind of have a negative feel with your friend or loved one, because their trust has been shaken, or why would God allow this, or why didn't God answer my prayers? They need to express that to God. He already knows, but it's that channel, that communication channel that he wants us to express ourselves to him. And when we share our deepest pain, and talk to him about it, then that's when that channel opens up. That's when we allow it to open up. And we can start receiving and feeling his comfort.
And I think kind of a way that you guys can engage with somebody who's walking through grief is being that safe place for them to express those emotions, whatever they may be feeling, or in sadness is of course one, but there's just a whole slew of things that they're going to be experiencing. Do we have that list?
Yes, it's
Is it
page,
it's somewhere in your packets. There you go.
There you
yes.
go.
Yes,
Common
common responses. Yeah, and so
About 4 pages.
it's about 4 pages, and you're, you know, one person isn't going to be feeling all of those. I went back, we got those in like a little booklet when we were doing Grief Share, and I got to see all the ones I marked, and I marked several. And so, you know, you don't, it's so individual, but I can guarantee you they will be experiencing many of those. And a lot of those are what we would consider kind of negative emotions that we're like, ooh, you should not be that angry, you should not be that, you know, you shouldn't withdraw, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And I think a lot of those comments, a lot of those comments can cause people to close off rather than open up. And so I think being an open and safe place for those people to express those things to you, and kind of just practicing that ministry of presence of like, just, oh, I'm so sorry, like, you know, and just sitting with them in that, and just sitting with them in that, in and of itself, is reminding them of God's love and His presence. And that speaks louder than saying, well, you really should know that God loves you, and He's, you know, you should be angry at Him. And so, just being that safe place for them. And I remember I was feeling a lot of the same things of anger and doubt at the Lord, and really stepped back from a lot of, I was doing missions overseas beforehand. I had always been involved in ministry, but after my mom passed, I stepped back from church, I stepped back from my small group. Like, there was just a lot of ways that I disengaged, and a lot of questions I had about the Lord's goodness, and a lot of, like what she said about Romans 8:28, like not being able to accept God's goodness. I truthfully didn't want Him to be good, because that meant that I had to say that what happened to me was still good, and I just couldn't accept that for the longest time. And I had a lot of anger and a lot of questions to the Lord. And I remember I was, one of my friends came and visited after my mom passed, and we were driving, and I was already starting kind of to have a lot of anger and questions, and I asked her, are you worried about me? Like, are you scared that I'm gonna just like fall off the deep end? And she's like, no, I'm not scared. Like, you're gonna be okay. And I just remember that was just the most comforting thing, to hear somebody say that, even though I had all these questions and these doubts and this anger and all of these negative emotions, that she was willing to sit there with me and not be afraid of those emotions, and not be afraid of what I had to, all of that nastiness that came out of me. That she was willing to walk that with me and not be afraid for me, or, not be scared off by those emotions. And so I think that, not maybe correcting them, even if they're out of line, because I was out of line a lot of times with the Lord, but at the same time, like, God knows where I'm at. And so if I'm feeling it anyways, like, He wants me to come to Him with Him, instead of hiding it and turning my back towards Him. Like, engage God with those emotions, and He isn't scared off by all the bad emotions or negative whatever that I have for Him. And if you're able to encourage somebody to move towards God, move towards people in those things, instead of holding it alone, that is going to really help their healing process. And so just engage the messy, honestly, and help them engage the messy, because I know that was something that was helpful for me too, was having people to encourage me to engage that messiness, because even I was a little bit afraid of what was coming out of me at times. And so to hear somebody else say, I know you're a little bit afraid of what's coming out of you, but I'm not. Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah.
So she's about to start a clip from the movie Inside Out. It's a cute little cartoon, but it has a lot of, I think, really important themes to it. And I don't know if you haven't seen the movie. It's there's like it. I'm gonna butcher this, but essentially it's like you see the emotions in a, like, I don't know, she's probably a 12-year-old girl, and these emotions they're like trying to Riley is the girl, she's moved location, she's really sad, but she's basically shoving all the emotions in, and all the emotions in her head are freaking out, trying to solve it inside her brain. You can see like inside her brain. And so, and kind of what I'm pulling from this clip is just that, in this clip you'll see like a little glass ball, which is a memory of her being sad, and how that sadness brought people to come to her and to engage in her, and that memory turns into a joyful memory. And so just kind of that idea of that we're never one emotion. And so I think that if you're able to help somebody engage in the sadness, and you're able to come alongside them and help them engage with God in their sadness, like that is when the healing process begins. And through that sadness, I don't know how to explain it, and you kind of touched on it before, but through that sadness, I was able to experience God's intimacy and His joy and His comfort at the same time as deep grief. And there is a place for both. And I think that engaging in the sadness is what allows, and especially I think with others and with the Lord, really expressing your pain in whatever form it takes with the Lord and with others is what kickstarts that healing process, and allowing those deep pains to find joy and find comfort in, with the pain. And it's not one or the other, it's both. And so, yeah, this is cool.
It was the day the Prairie Dogs lost the big playoff game. Riley missed the winning shot. She felt awful. She wanted to quit.
Sadness. Mom and Dad, the team, they came to help because of sadness. We have to give it.
Yeah, so, yeah, kind of like this talked about, just like, I think when, it's not that God isn't always there wanting to comfort us, but until we're able to admit those emotions and whatever comes with your grief, until you're able to admit those and really talk to God, kind of like you were talking about earlier, is when you are able to really experience that comfort. I really liked how you connected it to Romans 8:20.
What I said.
I know, it was really good.
I just know that me being honest with God, with my thoughts and my feelings and my questions, and knowing that he already knows me, but He was waiting for me to be open up to Him. And somehow that opened up my ability to receive His comfort. And it's not till you receive His comfort that you can understand how Romans 8:28 can possibly be, could possibly take place after such a horrible event, losing a son or anybody. You know, it does take trust. And also in that process, you know, there's a lot of scripture that says, always give thanks to God, always give thanks to God. Well, that's wise. You don't feel like giving thanks when you just had a loss. And I don't feel like thanking God that my son died. I thank God but I started looking for other reasonable legitimate things that I had to thank God for, and there was a bunch. There was a bunch. And even though I don't know why things happen, God does, and He can turn things around. So that's when I started having faith again in Romans 8:28.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just do that process. It's a process. And it didn't happen overnight. It probably took a couple of months. I don't know. I don't remember a timetable at all, but
Well, that's a good point too. I think like,
yeah.
yeah, there is no timetable for grief. There is no, I mean, we talked about, you hear a lot about the stages of grief, and there's some truth to that, but it's not this like 5-step process, and once you hit 1, you're on to 2, and then you're on 3, and then you're on 4. It's just, it's all over. It's messy. It's, and it's evolving too. I think it's not what the things that are helpful to you the first week are not the same things that are helpful to you the first month or the first year. And so I think that's kind of a part of the ministry of presence, is continually walking, and that's a part of walking it with them too, is continuing to engage and be intentional with how you were there for them by, I think we'll talk about it later, so I don't get ahead of myself, but just the fact that grief is disruptive, and so it is an identity crisis. The rug, your floor has been taken out from under you, and so don't expect them to be the same person that they were before grief hit. Don't have the same expectations of their capacity to, do things. Don't, expect them to, even it caused a lot of not trust issues, but doubts with the Lord. And so a lot of those would have never happened if, my mom hadn't passed and I hadn't had cancer. And so it's, you're on this and then grief, and you're on a different trajectory. And so being very generous to accept them with, where they churn or how they churn, and just not expecting them to continue on, the way that you knew them before. And so just giving, that's a part of just giving them space to be what they need to be, I think, in that time, and loving them through it by just walking with them through it. So, yeah. All I have to say about that. Oh, give me one moment. Yeah, and so, let me just, okay. Just when we were going through Grief Share, there was like a video series that we went through, and Paul David Tritt, I can't remember exactly what he said, but this is kind of what I gathered from it, and kind of a brief summary of what he said. But essentially, going through grief is like being in a basement with no windows. It's dark, and you know that the sun is out, but you can't see it, you can't experience it. And so helping your friend or whomever going through grief, just recognize, just kind of trying to be that light by just walking with them through it, and reminding them of the Lord's love just by being with them. And I think that it's like you're underwater. It's you know all these things cognitively. I know that the Lord is good. I know that He's there, but you don't always experience them. And so walking with somebody can be that tangible experience of love that maybe they can't feel directly from the Lord, but they're experiencing through your presence.
So one of the things my sister did, she gave me a devotional book, and I still read it every day. This is not God's Word, so this is not as important as God's Word. But it has a language in it that I can understand, and it points me to God's Word. It lists scriptures every day, and I still read it because I don't have it memorized. I don't remember it year after year. It's still a blessing to me, and just like God's Word is. But she would, I said she would call and ask me if I'd read it. But in going through this, I started finding a lot of verses Somebody had earlier had suggested to me journaling, and I thought, I don't know if I know how to journal, or I don't know if I can journal. Well, I started feeling like I needed to write down these verses that spoke to me, so I was journaling that way. But I found a lot of verses in Psalms. One,
Those are in your packet
Yeah,
too.
they're in
There's
your
a page
packet.
of Judy's verses.
yeah, there's one in Isaiah and there's one in Matthew, and it talks about God holding my hand. Well, that's what we do with a loved one or a child that needs comforting or some guidance, is you put your arm around them or you take them by the hand and walk with them. And I don't know, that just really, really spoke to me, that he loved me enough and cared for me to reach down and take me by the hand. I'm still a real shy person when it comes to raising my hands in church, but goodness, if you want God to take your hand, reach out to me. But those verses really spoke to me. And also, if you're reading in the New Testament, those red letters really speak to me. There's a Christian song that talks about the red letters, and I like the lyrics of that song. But those were, I don't know, it just really reached out and comforted me. That was part of my comfort from God, was realizing his steadfast love. Psalms 89 talks about his steadfast love, and that's throughout Psalms a lot as well.
Judy, I think one thing you mentioned when we were talking the first time was the woe is me passages, and we've been talking about Psalms of Lament the last couple of Sundays. I thought that was, just those that took on new meaning or got your attention in a different way.
Yeah, that it was okay to lament. There's certainly a time to do it. And I don't, at the time, I don't know that I fully realized it. Looking back now, I see the process of lamenting and drawing near to God and realizing that he's trustworthy even when things happen. And I don't always know the answers, but he's still trustworthy, and there's still a lot to be grateful and thankful. And I think that expressing trust and expressing thankfulness, even doing it because I knew it was a good thing to do and I didn't feel it, helped me heal, or helped with healing. Not that I still don't cry or have, emotions, but the healing of the great pain that I did have is not it's not daggerish anymore. It's just emotions now. So, the woe is me passages were comforting. And then the passages in Psalms, the other ones as well.
So Anna, one thing you talked about was how important when people would remember or share with you. You want to get us started on that?
Yeah, so just kind of some practical things that you can do for your loved ones who've lost somebody is just remembering those big days. Some of those big days for me, and these will probably be different for everyone, but I think, kind of some general ones are the loved one's birthday. That's always really hard for me, is my mom's birthday. Obviously the day that she passed is a really hard one. And then Mother's Day is hard for me as well. And so, I think that when people reach out to me on those days, it just means the world to me. Like, I just can't even express to you how much a little 3-word text, "I'm thinking of you today," means to me, because grief is so lonely, and anyone who remembers the things that are important to you, those people are just forever dear to my heart. Even if there's there's a friend who I don't speak. She lives across the country. I don't see her all the time. I don't speak to her that often, but she remembers every year the day that my mom passed, and she texts me every year. And just says, "I love you, I'm thinking of you." And she is just forever has just the biggest spot in my heart, just for remembering that day. And so it's a small thing to you, but to the person, I guarantee you it will be huge. And so I would suggest putting those dates in your calendar and just say, text so-and-so that you're thinking of them, that, a story of, or some, if you knew the loved one, something that you loved about them, or that, you know, a story about them, something like that. That is so huge for me. And if you're even, you know, if you're particularly close with the person who is grieving, I remember on my mom's first birthday, two of my dear friends took the day off from work, and they made a cake with me because my mom loved to bake, and they decorated the house, and they just listened to me share stories about my mom. Yeah, and so just small gestures like that stick with me, you know, and I'll never forget them. Because that was, yeah, a part of walking alongside somebody in grief. And yeah, I just, yeah.
It's very much
it's-
appreciated.
Yeah, it's very much appreciated, yeah. And so, bullish. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say about that.
My sister did something similar. Logan died December 28th, and his birthday was the following August 28th. And she made a card and sent it to me. He was very gifted musically. He taught himself to play the guitar, the bass, keyboards. Anyway, so she decorated this card with scrapbooking things that reflected his talents and what he liked. And it was a birthday card celebrating Logan.
And I think that sometimes, well, I've heard that you don't want to make the person sad. You don't want to remind them of something sad. I guarantee you they are already sad.
Yeah.
And so you texting them isn't going to remind them that they're sad. It's going to, I wish I had a graph, because I think that if, you know, the amount of text that I got was directly proportionate to how relieved I felt on the days that that were hard. And so, yeah, and so every person that reached out, just, I feel like, it's maybe cheesy or corny, but it just took a little bit of that pain away with each text that I got, because it just was a reminder that I wasn't alone, and that people loved me and cared about the things that I care about. And so everybody wants that. And so I think the thing about grief, though, is it's such an intense experience that, you know, it's your birthday, you would want somebody to remember it, but on something that was so intense, that much more you want people to recognize and appreciate that experience and recognize that experience. And so I think just honestly, even some of my friends have lost, you know, loved ones recently, and even I am like, ooh, do I text them? Like, even though I'm in here telling you what to do, even I have those exact same like fears that, oh, I don't want to intrude. I don't want to, you know, maybe they don't want to hear from me, but just put that voice away and just reach out. Because and this is kind of something I've started doing is, when I text them, say, and especially if I'm asking like, how are you? Or, how was this day for you? Saying, hey, I just want you to know that I love you. I'm thinking of you. How was this day for you? You don't have to respond, but just know that I love you. And don't always expect a response, because they might not have the capacity for that. And even giving them permission to totally ignore you. But I guarantee you that even if they ignore you, it was not for nothing. They will still internalize that and feel loved.
And if she was with friends, she would be remembering in isolation.
Yeah.
She would be remembering and hurting anyway. So a close friend who knows and sends that message is even better, and it validates that, yeah, I still have some pain.
Yeah.
Probably always will, but it validates the event, the painful event. And having that validation is a bit of comfort. Just somebody else recognizing your loss or your injury or your whatever, your pain.
Yeah. And I think even like, and this takes a lot more thought, but even just for me, thinking of things that aren't even holidays, like when a friend gets married and she has a special moment with her mom, like I'm so happy for my friend, but that's still hard for me. Things where you experience that loss by watching, whatever it may be, but just, I don't know, I can't think of any other, I can only think of my own experiences, but just, things that kind of highlight the fact that you highlight your loss in whatever situation it is. Just being thoughtful. It doesn't mean you have to stop that experience. I wouldn't ever want my friend to not have that moment with her mom, but I think just being aware is helpful, just saying, hey, and I think just being thoughtful of those and maybe thinking through some of those things if you're particularly close with the person, how that might impact them. And again, it doesn't mean you stop living your life or you stop enjoying those moments, but just being aware.
Okay, and Anna, you talked about that little bottom paragraph under F.
Okay.
Just knowing, like, being sensitive to who you entrust your grief to. You want to talk about that?
I think that I have just come to recognize that some of my friends and just, people that I encounter, not everyone has the same maturity or understanding or capacity to understand my experiences. And so I've just been, I don't want to say careful, but maybe just more aware of who I share the deeper parts of me with, or the more painful experiences with. And it doesn't influence how much I care about them or love them, but it does influence how much I allow them into my grief journey. And I consider grief a very pivotal point in my life. And so it does mean that some of those friendships change. And so, I don't know. I think I don't know how that helps people who are, walking alongside someone else, but just, I guess, I think that is just something I've become aware of just recognizing that not everyone is equipped to handle my experiences. And honestly, not, we're all at different, when I went through my grief, some of my friends were going through their own things and they just didn't have the capacity to care for me in that way. And that wasn't, it was hard. There were parts of me that were bitter and resentful for those things, but as I've, had time to heal and gone through those things, I've been able to recognize with a little bit more clarity, like, oh, they have their own things going on, and just because they didn't have the capacity to love me in that specific way, A, doesn't mean that they don't love me, and B, doesn't mean that they are an uncaring, unkind person, but they just didn't have the capacity, and I had to search for the people who did have the capacity. And so even just giving yourself permission, like if you are going through your own something and you don't have that full capacity, like just, giving yourself permission to realize what you can and can't be for a person who's going through grief.
We kind of touched on the be patient. So I don't have your outline in front of me, but we talked about remembering and sharing. And then the next one is be patient. And Anna touched on that as you look through those notes. Anything else you want to add to that part? Maybe the looks fine does not.
And the timeline expectation.
Oh, yeah, and the be patient right here. You touched on that, most of that.
I did. Oh, I did. Yeah, I did want to say that though. That kind of how do I say this? Like I said, it's so much better. But I think one thing that was surprising to me through going through grief was that I kind of had this image of what grief would look like, and a lot of it came from movies of, the rain at the funeral and like the black and, everyone's just downcast face for, a year. And it was really surprising to me that like I had to keep going. Like we had a funeral outside on a beautiful sunny day, and I think I wore green. Like, it was different than I expected. And I think, like the day after my mom passed, I went to physical therapy, and then I went to the zoo because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what you were supposed to do. And so I think that, kind of the takeaway is that just because somebody is looks fine on the outside, they're cracking jokes, they're still smiling, they still show up to church and do all these things, doesn't mean that that 4-page list of emotions isn't going on the inside. And so I think just because they might not look like the picture of what we think somebody who's grieving should look like doesn't mean that they're not grieving. And so to go by the outward appearance of somebody as an indication of whether you should ask how they're doing or not is a very bad way to go by. And so just again, it goes against so much of our natural inclinations to I think in grief, but I think just continuing to be consistently create space to say, how are you doing? Like just being, like say those words, because you would be surprised at how often people wait for the person who's grieving to bring up their grief, and how often I was waiting for the other person to ask me how I was doing because I didn't want to unload and burden them with my experience. And so being intentional, and I've talked about this with several different friends who've gone through grief of, it's kind of surprising how often I think we feel like we need to build up to asking how they're doing. Like we kind of go through an hour of just like casual conversation. It's like, by the way, how are you? And you're like, okay, I gotta leave in about 10 minutes. And so saving it for the end, just because we feel like we have to get all this other stuff out of the way, but not being, scared or shy, or it's okay if you're scared or shy because I feel the same way, but just kind of having that boldness to, at the beginning, just say, how are you? Like, tell me, I'm here. Like, I want to hear what's going on inside. I want to see past the smiling face and past the, I'm doing fine. And I want to hear about that list you've got going on of what you're experiencing. And so being very direct and intentional with your questions is really important, because I think when you're going through grief, it's so much, you're just like, I don't want you to think I'm crazy, so I'm just going to wait for you to ask. Yeah.
And being the patient part, I remember, my son died on a Saturday. We had a service on Thursday or Friday. I can't even remember. And then I had to be back at work the following Monday. And people were very kind. But after a while, after a couple of weeks, I felt, and I don't know if I was right or wrong, but I felt like they needed me to recover and move on. And so I wasn't ready to totally recover. I couldn't yet, but I had to hide that. So that's what takes some patience. In the workforce or the work setting, you don't want to be emotional. You want to steer away from stuff that's going to make you cry, because then it slows your productivity, whatever. But I just felt inside like I really had to cover up my pain and be as normal as I could, because it made them feel awkward if they saw me crying or something. So that takes some patience. That just takes some working through. It may be 3, 4, 6 weeks afterwards, and they still have times of crying. So you do have to be patient and not judge them for their decreased productivity or, their clumsy mistakes. People do tend to be clumsy, physically clumsy, when they're grieving. It's funny how they'll trip over stuff or spill water. It's just part of that. It's part of that. So it does take some additional patience if you're willing to do that.
Anna talked about the stages of grief, we've probably all heard the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and those are pretty much outdated, not a thing, and actually were created for the dying person, right? To process
before death.
Their own death. So we've included a handout about the tasks of grief. Judy, do you want to touch on that at all?
Sure.
Okay. I think the pages. There it is.
Oh, okay.
And you don't have to go through it, but where you got it, maybe was that from Grief Share?
I think it was. It was from Grief Share. Yes. Well, accepting the reality of loss. Nobody wants to accept it. Never do you want to accept it. You kind of gradually realize you have no choice. So then you're like lost. How do I accept it? And hopefully you go to God. Some people have trouble doing that, but but accepting the reality, processing the pain. Again, that's what takes a whole lot of patience. It's gonna take longer than anybody expects. You're not gonna get well from this grief like maybe some of your close friends want you to. Everything has to be redefined. Number 3 talks about adjusting to the world without the deceased loved one. Well, even though you go to school or you go to work or you do your day-to-day routine, just like before, and now you do it again, it still feels very, very different. It's almost like you've been dropped in a whole new place. Nobody you know around you. It's just the way you feel, so isolated and alone. You've got to figure out how to exist. If you work, you got to figure out how you make a living to pay the bills and be responsible. If you go to school, you got to figure out how to study and pass your, make your grades and pass. So it's hard. The enduring connection with the deceased. I remember going through a stage where I didn't want to forget Logan. Or I didn't want anybody. And I have read that that's normal. You'll never have certain experiences with your mom. I'll never have certain experiences with my son. And so, how do you carry on that endearing connection in the absence? That I think can be kind of tough. But anyway, and that I'll probably be figuring that out for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Right, then the last handout in your packet is, so you can see, understanding grief, and there are a couple of, take some time, not right now, but later to read through that. There were some things that really stood out to the ladies when grief, talk about this when you feel crazy that it's not.
It's not pathological. It's non-pathological. So you're not crazy. Whatever emotions you go through, whatever behaviors you display, however clumsy or forgetful you are, you're not crazy. It's part of the grieving process. You have suffered a huge, huge impact. It's almost like a head injury. You can have a traumatic head injury. You can have a non-traumatic head injury. And it affects your balance, it affects your coordination, it affects your processing and sequencing and memory, everything. And so does an emotional head injury, an emotional injury like a loss. So does grieving. It's odd, it's a little hard to explain, but it can affect your physical coordination, balance, as well as all your mental capacity, because everything is controlled by the mainframe. Your balance is controlled in the brain, and that's where we're processing all of this injury. So you have had sort of a brain injury, but you're not pathological, you're not crazy, you're not psychotic, you're grieving.
And I think that for me, I think kind of ties back to what I was talking about of grief didn't look like how I thought it would, how it was kind of portrayed in the movies. I started getting migraines soon after my mom passed, and a lot of it was just stress and grief related. And so, grief doesn't just show up in one form. It's physical, it's emotional, yes, but that means so many things, it's anger, there's so many. Read the 4 pages of emotions and that'll give you an idea. But it's not just this one thing. I think so. Maybe I guess with that being just especially if you're really close with the person, just being in tune to not just whether they look sad, but maybe some of these other things that they might be expressing in ways that you wouldn't expect. Seeing, are they withdrawing from these things? Are they what's their anxiety like? You know, do they seem anxious? And so just recognizing that grief shows up in so many more ways than just tears or a sad face. And so just, being aware and in tune to their experience, and even being aware of these things a year in. You know, I think it took me about 2 years to really start feeling like myself. I kept saying to my counselor, like, is this the new version of me? Do I just not care about people, or is this grief? And it took me a really long time to feel like I could decipher what was just grief and what really had changed, because there were things that changed about me. And so it took 2.5 years to even really figure out what's grief, what's me. And so, still being aware and cautious of those things, well, you know, years more than that into their loss.
And sometimes you may be really heartfelt toward a person who suffered a loss, had a loss, but you weren't previously really close to them, like a close friend or a sister or just a real close. So maybe you can support somebody who is, because maybe you didn't have that rapport ahead of time to ask some of those really deep or some of those questions, but you can support somebody else, a friend who is closer, you know, like send some cookies or, you know, facilitate another person to do some of that. Especially with however you feel, if you feel like, well, I didn't know them that well, but I really, you know, you're really empathetic to their situation, that you're not sure if you should ask certain questions. Find out who their close friends are and assist those close friends to assist, you know, the person who's grieving.
Yeah, and I think on that, being a support for somebody, especially if you're a close support for somebody who's going through loss, I have ever sympathy for you as well, because it really is, it's emotionally taxing to deeply support somebody who's going through loss. And so, having kind of almost support on that end of, you know, finding somebody that you can kind of release to of your pain, because it's hard to watch a loved one go through something difficult, and so you kind of have your own experiences of that pain, and so finding somebody that you can express that to is helpful. And I think even just I think it is kind of, I feel like we're making it sound really hard to kind of tiptoe on, you know, I say this but I don't say that, and just, you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna say the wrong thing, you're gonna mess up, so just giving yourself permission to say the wrong thing, but just trying and showing up is gonna be what makes a difference. Because I have had friends who have said things to me that I was like, ooh, that actually hurt. But they continue to show up and to remember those dates and to remember those things, and that far outweighs any possibly insensitive thing that they said to me, because they kept showing up and they kept asking and they kept remembering those dates. And so, showing up is gonna far outweigh any wrong thing you say or thing you don't say. And so, but it is hard to support somebody who's grieving, but it is such a God-honoring, worthy cause, not cause, but thing. And
Mute this in a second when we do our Q&A.
Okay.
But
Okay.
in just a minute, we'll open it up for questions and comments. But a couple of things. Anna was so gracious when we were, just what you said now, but when we were talking about this initially, like, it seems like you're going to step on a landmine no matter what you do. But a couple of things that I wanted to share for those of us who desire to grow in this as caregivers, and these are all from this book. If you can't tell, I really love this book. And if you would like a copy, we have 4 of them in the back, and they're not found on Amazon. The one on there is the kind of the older edition, but I can order them from the organization that I got this one from. So anyway, just some encouragements for us as believers as we try to bring this love and peace to the grieving. As a caregiver, you bring your 2 most high and holy gifts to the one you care for. The correct question about these gifts is not what are they, rather it is who are they. The answer is basic. You bring Jesus and you bring yourself. Jesus is your greatest resource as you relate in a caring way to hurting people, and you yourself are your second greatest resource. You are an instrument of precision caring. True enough, you can learn certain skills and techniques that will enhance your helpfulness to another person, but all this is filtered through you, your genuine self, which you bring to the caring relationship. Relating to someone who is suffering at a deep level is a tremendously spiritual act. You meet the other person deeply and you both meet God. Jesus is powerfully active and a present participant as you relate to that person. The love you bring to suffering individuals is more than a mere reflection of God's love. It is God's love. So, just encouragement for those of us who have the Holy Spirit, who are followers of Jesus, that we carry him to the grieving, and we just need to be present and allowing him to work through us. And a couple of times the ladies touched on awkwardness or anxiety we feel, and it had some good things to say about that. It said, let your anxious feelings be your signal to bring God into the picture. Instead of resisting or denying your anxieties and feelings of helplessness, use them to help you relate more compassionately to those who are suffering. Give even these parts of yourself to God in prayer and ask him to use you despite your concerns and fears. He will. So, questions, thoughts from those of you? I know there are many of you who have been through grief or perhaps going through. We'd love to hear from you guys. Yeah, Skip.
Anna,
Yes.
I know your father. You talked about you going through the grief, but I
Yeah.
was thinking, was your father obviously going through grief also, and you each grieve differently?
Yes, grief is so individual. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, obviously I can't speak from a man's perspective, so I know that that's going to be different than my perspective. And so I think maybe to kind of broaden it a little bit is, or a good way to do that is to just kind of, I don't know, maybe not ask permission, but kind of just, yeah, again, that showing up and just kind of testing the waters, saying like, how are you? And just try to figure out what sticks with them, what draws out, their processing. And so, yeah, my dad, him and I are very different. And so we definitely experienced it very differently. But there were also a lot of similarities. Like I would say that recently, both him and I have kind of talked about that feeling of being underwater. Like I can kind of see how both of us have kind of almost submerged about the same time of kind of that processing of like starting to get involved in things that we used to be involved in and starting to be more involved in different things that were life-giving to both of us. And it looked different. Those things that we were involved in were different, but it was cool to see how, although our journeys were very different, there was definitely a very similar kind of process of just kind of that journey of kind of needing to figure out a lot in ourselves and then kind of being able to be like, okay, I can re-enter society again, and just being able to kind of see that even though we're very different, there are a lot of similarities too. So it is kind of, yeah, figuring out kind of what I like what that said about what you can bring as Jesus in yourself. So, don't try to be somebody that you're not. If you're, you still can be your authentic self and still show up in whatever way that looks like in your personality and the persons that you're ministering to, their personality. And it is going to look different, but just being really authentic to yourself and just showing up, I think still meets those needs despite the vast differences in ways people can grieve.
Question. Carol?
What are some things you should not say?
I know what you're going through. Even if you've had a loss and a grief as well, find a different way to say it. Don't tell them they should feel any other way than what they actually feel, because that won't help them get past. If they feel rebuked for feeling or thinking something that's not right for a Christian or not right for anybody, they won't be able, it will really stunt getting past that. Recognize their pain, recognize that it's, and encourage them to realize that they don't have to get past this pain like in a week. It will take time, and it's okay to let them take time. And like if you want to offer to do something, don't say something like, let me know if you need something. That just conveys you want to be a good person, but you're really a little afraid to commit. So whatever your talent is, offer that, or offer one small thing. And if they say no, okay, but if you change your mind, let me know. I'd be happy to do it later. Initially, like when someone passes, you may think you don't need anything. And then later, like weeks or months later, you may think, oh, I really could use that. And it seems like somebody offered that. Who was that person? Oh yeah, it was so-and-so. I mean, the thought process is just altered when you've had a loss. Don't make assumptions. Don't make them fit a norm. Like you have a month to grieve and then you've got to be, doing all these things. Let them have the freedom to express what they think and feel, because they're going to be guarded. They won't do that automatically.
I think anything that starts with, well, at least, it's just not a good way to go, because, and even if that's not maybe the phrase, anything that kind of has that same undertone of, well, that's terrible, but be happy about this. Just don't. Just really avoid those. And it doesn't mean that you can't talk about, how good has come from it, but that's really a lot later in your grief journey. It really wasn't for a year or two that I was able to start seeing the ways that God was good and was showing up in that deep grief. And so I think we want to get them to see those good things, because it is true, God is good, and so we want them to see that, but I think we also just want to make it better. And so that is why we often say try to put those positive things on it. But even like positive scriptures, although good and true, goes back to that scripture of it's like taking off a garment in the winter.
Yeah.
It's you just don't have space for happy things for a little bit, and so anything that tries to put a positive spin on their experience is, I would say, no. And there's something else I was going to say about that, but I don't remember. But I can't remember what I was going to say.
They can't see anything positive. They just can't initially.
Yeah.
All they see is that horrible pain. They just can't see any good. And it takes a while to recognize the good.
Yeah, and I would say that, this is kind of the opposite side of that, but anything that, it was interesting to look back through the Psalms and see what I had highlighted before grief, and it was like, God is my refuge, God is joy, and then after my grief, it was like, God sees me in my suffering. It was just, and so those were the things that were like a balm to my soul, were the ways that were the scriptures where Jesus wept over Lazarus' death. The things that were balm to my soul were not the ways, the joyful things. And so it was the things where God saw me in my pain and my suffering. End of story. It wasn't a but, it was end of story. And then later I started adding on the ways that I could see God's goodness.
Good. Sam?
Didn't have time, the driver's too far. I wish they would have said that at all, because I understand.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the drive plus 3, 5+ hours, so it's just like, when I have said it, and I want to remember it, and I still accept their comfort. It's just hearing them say it out it's an excuse. No, no, that wasn't as valued in our friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll toss my question in here. And I know that Judy has a prepared response, so I'll let her. I, by nature, am a connector, I think, because I think it brings me comfort to know that someone has shared experience with someone. So I naturally want to make those connections for people. And so I asked them, is that helpful? Like if, like, let's say, you know, I had a friend who had lost her mom to cancer early, or, you know, knew of another. I just wanted to know, is that something helpful? Is that off limits? Do you want to make those connections on your own? So speak to that.
Well, I don't know if I could have made the connections on my own, to be honest. Not, so a couple of ladies from church here invited me to lunch, and one of the ladies had lost a son, an adult son also. Different circumstances, but she had lost a son. And it was nice that they asked me to eat lunch with them. It was nice that they wanted to hear my story. They didn't rebuke me because of how my son died, or, you know, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel put down or judged. I did fear judgment with the, you know, son dying from an overdose. That's not what anybody wants, let alone a Christian. But they didn't judge me. The other lady whose son died was suicide, so I knew she didn't want to be judged either. So we got past that. I quickly didn't fear being judged or I don't know, looked down on. And I started sharing, since her experience was a couple of years before mine, she started sharing what she did that helped her, and she had a suggestion of journaling. And I know that came out in our grief group as well. Writing down your thoughts, writing down your questions, even the negative ones. And at first I thought, well, I don't journal, I thought it wouldn't work for me, but it's really ironic because I started doing that when I was writing down the verses that spoke to me. I mean, I even brought in this. So I did. I didn't do it in narrative, or I didn't do it in a paragraph, but I wrote down a little snippet and then the verse so that I could find it again. I did not want to not be able to find these verses again. I've got pages and pages and pages. So even though I went away thinking, well, I don't know if I'll journal, I ended up doing it, and it was really, I was doing it before I realized it. So those connections, it was small, intimate, it was, I didn't feel judged, I didn't feel put down. I felt like I was in the company of people with similar situation. And it was refreshing, it was nice, they were okay for me crying, because I cry so well. So it was validating, it was endearing.
I'm curious, like, how far along were you in your grief? Like, when?
This was just I think it was in January. I had already gone back to work. 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, so yes.
It was kind of, yeah, it was soon. Yeah. I had a lot of fear with being judged because my son died of an overdose. So that made it harder to open up.
I think one thing that came up over and over as we talked through things, even these two ladies had, you know, maybe what would have ministered to Judy would not for Anna at the time, or vice versa, or this. And heard from a friend who was going through her own, like losing her life to cancer. A mutual friend had reached out and said, oh, if you ever want to talk about our experience, because she had lost her husband, she was, no, I don't want that. I want to live my experience. I don't want to hear. So yeah, which makes it even trickier. Every person grieves differently and needs different things. But Oh gosh, we're past time. One quick thing, a couple of just really practical things that came up, and I didn't get them in the notes, but we talked about if you know someone who's suffering a loss and lives far away, like having groceries delivered to their doorstep. I know I learned this from Jan, and this is one of my new ministries when someone loses, taking a bag of paper goods and dropping them on the porch of someone who's had a loss, because there will be family coming in and they're going to need toilet paper and all the things like that. But anyone else have anything they want to throw out before we wrap up?
When you were talking about one of the people asked me how you were doing, you know, my sister-in-law, somebody approached her in the grocery store and said, "How are you doing?" She said, "I'm fine," you know. She hated crying in front of me. I was saying, "Oh, you're really not," you know. She said, "I just had to leave." She said, "I'm not going to stand in the grocery store and cry."
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's probably a good idea to consider where you are.
Yes.
That's a great.
That's a really good point.
And private area, if you want to, you know, really listen to somebody speak.
Yeah, you're not gonna open up in a
Yeah.
real public area, especially standing, or, I don't know, it
Yeah,
just,
she didn't like to go to church, and people would ask her that, because she didn't want to be crying in church.
Right.
Yes.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
You know, she said, "I just didn't stand in the grocery store, I just think."
And that's a really good point. And I remember people asking me how I am in public, and you're like, how do I answer that? Like,
Exactly.
do you want me to just like unload right now, or do you like, what are you really asking? And so, yeah, I think that could be a really confusing question in a very public, just kind of, especially, you know, our culture, that's just what you say. Oh, how are you doing? You know, and that is such a, yeah, it can be so confusing in the moment. But yeah, I think that intentionality of like, I'm coming over to your house, I'm bringing, you know, a coffee, if you drink coffee, and I'm gonna intentionally, you know, in a space that's appropriate, ask, how are you? What's going on in your heart? You know, or whatever man version of that is.
Take you out for a walk.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of resources I want to mention. The book, we can order those. Another great book on grief is A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. Tear Soup is one the ladies recommended that it's actually a children's book.
Kids
but
book, yeah. It's
Yeah.
for kids. It explains loss and also explains just kind of the process. I found in healing. I sent it to my friend who's my age,
Yeah.
who's experiencing loss. So it's good for all ages.
Yeah, I bought one for myself, and I
Mm-hmm.
bought one to share, and thoroughly enjoyed it. It covers different forms of loss, like divorce, or loss of a pet, or, well, death for sure. But
Illness, yeah.
yeah, had another coworker who's, I think it was 2-year-old, drowned a couple of years ago, and I found another book. So you can look for Christian sourced books, even specific to pediatric or children's loss. But a lot of it is getting them to express what they feel, put a word to how they feel to match their feeling, and the same for adults. We put a word and tell God how we feel. That seems to be a big common theme throughout, whether it's child or adult grieving processes. But anyway, yeah, that was a good book.
And it is put out by Stephen Ministries, which is the same source of this book. And this is a ministry we started at 12, probably 3 years ago. It's a series of 4 booklets. You send the first to someone 3 weeks after their loss, then 3 months, 6 months, and 11 months as they're approaching the year mark. And I mail them here. I just tuck a note in each time. We're praying for you, and I've got a calendar, and we do that. So that's a ministry we do here, but we want to make those available for purchase to the church family too. So if you have someone, a neighbor or a loved one in a different city that you think could benefit from those, I'm going to order a big stockpile of them when I order the books, and we'll have them in the office. They're $10 if you'd like to purchase those for someone and send them. Again, we do those for people here in the church, but that would be for outside. So thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate you being here and your time at this wraps up our Summer Institute series. So I know lots of you have been at several of them, and thanks for your participation.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.